So just a very quick disclaimer, everything I'm going to do and talk is open source. My whole world is 100% open source these days, and it's very refreshing to do that. And look, I even have a timer, man. Look, 45 minutes, right? All right, so this is an app I just created, right? So first of all, like everything that Jim said, like a lot of the stuff I completely agree with. Like I said, there's variations on this, right? Everybody has a bit of a different opinion, but I completely agree that if you guys are not using Claude, if you're not using these tools, you really need to get your heads around it, because I think it's the next really big transformation technology that we have, right? And there's a lot of hype, of course, right? Like come on, we're an industry that created hype out of NFT, blockchains, all that crap, right? So imagine when you have a technology that actually kind of works, right? So yes, there's lots of hype, there's lots of stuff, but the change is actually fundamental. And kind of what I want to talk to you guys about is what I'm basically saying, that the way I look at this is there's going to be an explosion. I call it Cambrian. For the ones who know, Cambrian is the bit of evolution that happened when there was an explosion of life forms on Earth, right? There was basically this period in our evolution where suddenly you went from, I don't know, 100 million species to like 5 billion species or something like that, like literally orders of magnitude of life, right? And I think we're about to experience that in the whole world, right? In applications, and including in application security, right? And again, remember that every one of those is something that we need to protect, right? And defend against, right? So I think it's already starting to happen, but it's only going to go a lot more accelerated. So I do actually have, I have 105 slides, right? So I'm going to accelerate on this, right? So here's the thing, right? Like this narrative that AGI will find all the vulnerabilities, and AGI is going to take over the world, and it's going to fix everything, and it's going to replace everybody, and people will work 3 days a week, right? All that BS, right? That has never happened in history. It's not going to happen again, right? In fact, I think Mark Murphy used to say this funny phrase where, it's very hard for someone to understand something when their salary depends on not understanding it, right? And this was kind of the early days of AppSec, but I think it's the same thing, right? You always have to look at who's making the claims, right? And what is their advantage of making the claims. So most of the people that talk about this massive kind of thing of it's going to replace everybody tend to be the ones who actually benefit the most from it. So I would take that with a pinch of salt, right? The thing that's interesting is that we know that the more capacity you have, the more work you have, basically it's this evolution of things, right? And basically what we have, is, and this is very important, right? The big direction of travel. And then, I'm going to talk about Wardley Maps a bit. If you guys don't know Wardley Maps, I highly recommend. It's kind of, for me, the best thing I've learned since, before the AI stuff. But there's this whole evolutionary phase that is happening, right? And if you look at the big direction of travel, right, it's from large models to smaller models, right? It's from vendor lock-in to sovereignty and open schemas, right? It's from, I can see that, from centralized control to distributed and local, from expensive intelligence to commodity intelligence. That's the direction of travel, right? And again, there was a comment here, I think one of you guys were saying about the whole, do you still need more developers? Do you still need more application security experts? In my book, yes, we need 10x than what we have right now, because we're going to see an explosion of companies, explosion of requirements. So in a way, the experts have never been more required. And again, if you are expert in your area, I advise you to double down on that expertise, right? Again, the AIs are not going to replace you. Just be clear, right? So basically, and there's this other thing that's quite interesting, right? There's this vibe coding stuff, right? And I think vibe coding is a really bad name. I used to kind of try not to say it, but again, when something gets adopted by the industry, it's hard to go against. But vibe coding is amazing, right? But you have to understand where it's being used, right? Vibe coding is basically, it's a great way to create a great brief. It's a great way to empower, basically, the product creators, the people that create stuff. It's a great way to basically allow them to say, here's what I want. So in a way, in the hairdresser analogy that we have, in my book, she's going to have to hire a developer, right? She's going to have to get access to the expertise the moment that technology becomes more mission critical, right? And that's the evolution. The problems in the past is those individuals, the same way that the HR professionals, what's it called, the customer service professionals, the people on the front line, everybody outside the normal development, their technology stack was really bad, not to use another word, right? So we now get into a world where people used to create spreadsheets, right, which is fundamentally vibe coding, right, slower, right, to now be able to create briefs much better. But it's very important to determine the difference between what's going to be explorer zone, which is when you explore stuff, you're creating stuff, you're figuring out, you're creating the brief, right, on that mode, to what's the villager zone, which is when you take that stuff and you start to package it, create some rules, professionalize it, and then the town planner zone, which is when it has to be really well engineered, really well defined, etc. So you guys, my advice is you kind of should figure out where's your normal center of gravity. People tend to have one, like where do you kind of like to sit in, right? But then double down on that area. But we need, brilliant people at every single one of these zones, right? The difference is vibe coding is kind of here, right? Vibe coding is when you figure things out, when you create briefs, right? And once you've done that, you need to hand that over to the next thing, right? So I actually agree with this. There's not a lot of doom stories that I don't agree, but I think this is actually coming. It's still yet to see if the companies react well or not, right? Historically, they don't have a good batting average, but let's see, maybe they're a bit different now. But I think this idea of charging 100% of fees for users who use 10% of their products is going to come to an end, right? And I think that if you really look at the software products that we have, they're really, really bad, including in cybersecurity, right? Including in AppSec, right? And that's why, everybody complains about the tools, everybody complains about the workflows, and this even the people who have tools, right? Forget about the ones who can't even use it, right? So I do think that we're going to a world where you're going to have a very hyper focus on apps, which is why I'm saying you're going to have an explosion of apps, right? Because we're going to start to focus on what is actually the customer needs. What do they want? How everything works, right? And this is before we even add the agents to the mix, right? Because every single agent that is now put in line, it's like a new product. It's a complete massive attack surface. So if you think that we have stuff to protect, right? We go into a world, right, where every company, every SaaS product that you buy, everything you put in your pipeline that has an agent becomes a ridiculous attack surface, right? Which is why I recommend you don't put agents in line, and I'll come in a second, you use LLMs, not to use LLMs, but it's very dangerous, right? I cannot overstate this. So I'm the first one to say that you guys really need to get your heads around agents and how it works and coding and sort of all the agentic development and LLM development. But the agents, when you create an app that has an agent that is not well protected, that is the ultimate insider threat, right? And let's be clear that for a lot of companies, we got away with insider threats, right? I guarantee you that every one of you of your companies, if you went malicious and rogue, or if your laptop went malicious and rogue, the amount of damage you can do in your company is massive, right? Like absolutely massive. If you do a threat model and map the whole thing, right? So this is also coming. Not only are we going to have a massive amount of explosion, a massive amount of code everywhere, we're going to put these agents in the middle because they do add value, right? They do make things better, and it's going to compound all the error. And of course, then the companies who decide to fire all the humans because they think the agents are going to do everything is going to be even worse, right? Because then the whole blow up is even more problematic. And again, my approach is an engineering approach, right? I highly recommend you guys to also do this. So there's two things I did in my career that I think work really well. One of them was I waited until I was quite old, right, to become an executive. So I only got into my CISO career in my early 40s, right? And I highly recommend you guys to do that because it meant that by the time I got there, I was still the most technical person in the room, or one of the most technical persons in the room. So I really knew my stuff, right, in terms of technically speaking, right? So I always build engineering teams, right? And in a way, I've always had this mindset, right, that you have to be building stuff, right? You have to basically be solving problems, right? Even as I went into an engineering approach, and then even when I started into management approach, and I kind of worked at two levels, which is how I operate now. I operate at strategic level and highly technical level. And again, I highly recommend you guys to start doing that kind of stuff, which is why I never lost my edge, which is why now I strategically manage my agentics and my development and everything that Jim was saying in terms of briefs. In a way, I feel like I double down that quite a lot. Although I know Jim didn't show everything the guy he's doing, right? But I literally have briefs for briefs for briefs. I create massive amount of stuff before we even get to code, right? Because that's how you really scale, and that's how you get really, really quality materials. And again, I double down on the fact that I'm creating things that I never thought I could create, right? Some of the technology I have developed now is stuff I wish I could have created, but I couldn't, right? And OWASP is uniquely positioned to develop all these tools, and that's where I'm going to come into, right? So the next 10,000 companies are going to come from this massive explosion of products. These SMEs are going to outperform everything, right? And OWASP has the expertise to actually pull this off. So just to be clear, my recommendation is that every single one of you should have a company, right? Or two, or three, right? Even when you're employed by other people, right? You should be going into that world. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. And by the way, that's what I've done, right? So I left, I had an exit, I left being a CISO, right? And now I've done, this is my fourth startup in a sequence. The great news is none of them blew up. So I'm still smiling. I don't have the stress that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have, right? And I think I found my one, which is the Secure Send, right? Again, it's all open source, right? And it's basically, it's about the experimentation and how you develop, right, on this. So why every one of you, because I think all of you are AppSec professionals or developers, but if you're here, you're an AppSec professional, whether you call it or not, right? Why you should be building a company, right? Now, the thing about this is that, and there's this phrase in music, right? And again, I used to be a professional musician, so I'm using some references here, that if you have to play to get paid, right, you have to sing for your supper, right? That's kind of the analogy. So that means that you paid in proportion to the hours that you work, right? The problem with that is that most of the value goes to your employer, right? Most of the value goes to the person who pays you, and the corporate currently, they reward hierarchy, right? And they reward capital. They don't reward the creators, right? And in a way, you know, the capital gets the return, not the talent, not you. So what I recommend you guys to do is you want to have ownership of what you create, right? And you do that by creating companies. And by the way, creating a company in UK is 50 quid. It takes, you know, a couple of hours a day if you want to choose a name, and that's it, right? So it's not complicated at all, right, to do a company, right? And this is important, right? You want to have this environment where you have stronger share of the value you create, you make money while you sleep, you create assets that others can buy, and you have a recurring revenue, right? But a recurring revenue should be based on value, not lock-in. And I'll come back to that in a second. So the other thing that is absolutely crazy in most companies is that your expertise is being wasted, right? If you look at most environments, you will have 20 set of skills, some very deep, some good. Most companies can leverage 1 or 2% of that, right? What happened, or maybe 5%, or whatever happened you to be hired for, right? So this is, again, one of the areas that I think GenAI is going to help a lot in organizations, which is to leverage the talent of the humans that they already have, right? Because at the moment it's very inefficient. But here's the thing, like you need to basically be leveraging your skills. So one way to do that is to become a virtual consultant, right? And I want to caveat that when we talk about agents, right? An agent is literally a ChatGPT, a Claude, or whatever you guys use, prompt with a markdown file that defines the role, maybe some skills, and maybe some of the markdown stuff. So it's not rocket science, right? When somebody says, I'm firing up an agentic team, all they're doing is spinning up multiple processors, having each of those well-defined, right? And then have them collaborate with each other. That's it. Right? So if you're using, you know, any LLM, you already have an agentic workflow. It's just an agent of one, right? And it's kind of like you defining it, right? So when I'm saying you have scale by agents, is mean that you can now have part of your team a project manager, a developer, a consultant, an architect, right? I have agents in my team, which I love. I have the librarian, my favorite agent. I have the cartographer because we do maps. I have the historian. I have the journalist. I have the Sherpa, manage the users. I have the customer advocate. I have the ambassador. I have the alchemist who deals with investors, right? I create all sorts of roles because I can think what is the right focus that I want for this task, and I create an agent for it, right? And now these days, Claude Code makes it very easy to do all that kind of stuff, right? So when you think about creating a company, right, there's 3 key principles here, right? The first one is you have to create something that has very low marginal costs. It should not cost a lot. And these days, it should be serverless. It should be easy to deploy. You should not be spending a lot of money to serve this, right? And again, if you put an LM to it, the costs are not crazy, right? The second one is you have to get people to use it, right? If they can't use it, you know, you don't have anything, right? And initially, you should give it for free, right? Because if you give it for free and then they use it, you know for real what's the problem, right? And then if you take it away, they go, oh, I want it back. Well, there you go. That's your value proposition, right? And that's all you should do, right? And I will expand on that, right? And the other thing to think about this, right? And it's important, right? Like if you can create a company, right, that has £10,000 recurring revenue, right? Forget recurring, I say, you know, regular revenue, right? Because I don't want to talk about recurring, you know, annual recurring, all that stuff. That's subscription. Let's say you generate about 10K profit, right? 10K revenue, right? That's already 120K a year. That's already a 1.2 million valuation company, right? If you have 20 or 30 or 40% of that, that's quite a lot of, you know, money that you can have, right? Again, if you have 50K revenue, then that's a 600K a year, that's a £5 million valuation company, right? That's the name of the game. So we're not talking again about crazy amounts here, right? What matters is, can you create a service that somebody can buy for it, right? And what matters is how much share ownership you have of that particular piece of the pie, right? So, you know, I'm a big believer in open source. I've been doing open source for a long time, but I don't do it because it's like, you know, let's save the world, let's share everything, blah, blah, blah. Again, that's one of the reasons I do it, but that's not the main reason I do it, right? The main reason I do it is because it's the most efficient way to operate, and it's the most efficient way to develop, to communicate, to share. And here's the thing, like most open source projects have 2, 3, 5, 7, 10 contributors, even in OWASP, right? Like, you know, if all this crowd here decided to join the ASVF for AI as contributors, you'd be like literally probably 80%, right? Or a large chunk, right, of the active contributors in most projects, right? Most projects have a very small amount of contributors, right? But the thing that most people forget with open source is that when I open source my code, you know who gets to use that code next week, next month on a different company? It's me, right? And this is a very important point. Like, there's so many great stuff I created in the past that was locked in companies. And a lot of it was not even locked because, okay, maybe they want to create revenue from it. It was locked through to attrition. It was not easy to share. You know, it was not, there was no way to publish that stuff. So I've been now, and that's why for me, open source for a long time it's a great way to share my research. It's a great way to keep my research alive. And now I'm on this mode where I build a company A, right? Guess what? When I go to build company B, I get to use the code from company A. Then I go to company C, I get to use that. So I build a Cyber Boardroom, which I still think is a great idea. Too soon, not enough traction. Then I build the MyFeeds.ai. Again, I think it's a really cool company. The news industry doesn't want to deal with it. It's still hooked on subscriptions. I'm like, oh, okay, can't solve that industry, right? Then I found, you know, a couple of others, and then I found this one, which is about the one I have now, which is, well, I still have them, but they're still alive. They don't cost me a lot of things. But now I have one where I basically share files in an encrypted way. It's really, you know, a great way to. It started as a kind of a weed transfer kind of way of doing stuff, but now I have vaults, I have data vaults, all sorts of really powerful technology, right? Which I'll show you now in a second. So I feel I found the company that I think is the big one, but I had this evolution. But I didn't lock that my technology and my ideas in my first company. And I think this is very important, right? Open source means that your ideas, your technology are still available to you. So, and that, for me, that's good enough, right? Even if me is the only one who benefit from it, it's still good enough. So if you have stuff, open source it, right? And then you can build a business model on top of it on top, right? So again, start building, right? That's what you really should be doing. And this is a very important point. Even if the models that we have today don't evolve, and they will, but even if they don't evolve anymore, there's enough power here already to make a dramatic change, right? So this is important. So let's look at why cybersecurity professionals, why is this crowd and cybersecurity, right, the best ones to do this, right? The thing that I found as a CISO, right, was that we are the only function in the whole company that has access to everything. We have access to, from board members all the way to the entire org chart, right? Again, if you build bridges, don't destroy them, right? We have access to the data, we have access to the systems, we have access to the people, we have access to the whole lot, to the corporate strategy, every spreadsheet that exists in the business, we have access to, right? We should be leveraging that, right? Because I think we are one of the few in the entire organization that has that stuff. And you've probably seen that. If you do threat models, you might find yourself in places where you go, whoa, hold on. You know, that person is like 3 levels above me, right? And suddenly you're doing a threat model with that person, right? Or you're reporting at very high levels. The other thing that's interesting is that what I also found in a way from a CISO point of view is that the AppSec and technology and cybersecurity, they're the easy parts, right? We can control that. OWASP has an amazing guidance. We know how to build secure systems. We know how to make things scale, right? The problem is, how do you apply that to business? And the problem is, you need to change the business, right? You need to actually drive transformation. That's the hard part. And now we have the ability to do that at scale. Now we have the ability to say, when you want to push a cybersecurity practice, you don't create one brief. You could create 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 debriefs, right? You can create a brief for the person you're interacting with, for the person that they have to interact with, right? You can create personalized briefs per language, per culture, per role, for everything. That scales, and that's a great use of the LLMs for that, right? And again, the CISO mind map, it's a business map. We operate at business level, right? And the other thing that's really cool is that our mindset is very entrepreneur, right? We think in systems, we tend to have holistic systems, we tend to all be curious, right? We tend to be evidence-driven, because that's what vulnerabilities are. And if you ever done an incident, if you ever were involved in incident response, every skill that you have there on the left is exactly the same skills that you need when you set up a company. Right. So again, if you are already, have multiple scenario coordination, organizational alignment, multiple communication, multifunction, fast decision making, evidence collection, all of that is what you need when you start a company, right? And you need to learn. So there's tons of opportunities. In fact, I actually think that AppSec should be developing tools that go into other industries. And by the way, and I think I did a presentation on OWASP a while back. It still hasn't happened, but I think it's the reality is that if the AppSec tools don't really sort of go to the next level, they will be eaten by other industries, right? Let's be clear, a risk analysis tool with really good mappings, with really good connections, will do AppSec better than anybody else, right? And that's the thing. But I think we have some unique capabilities that will make us, we should be the one eating other industries' lunch, right? Not the other way around, right? And again, I think we are natural entrepreneurs, right? We have a unique way of looking at things. We have an interesting mindset, right? And again, the market is going to explode on this. So let's look at how you actually build a company, right? How do you actually do a company in this AI era, right? So I'm going to talk about the core primitives. I'm going to talk about why the deployment is the product, which is why I think a lot of GenAI projects are failing, right? Because they tend to view deployment as the last bit. And I actually started there. I kind of started my entrepreneur sort of stint about 2 years ago, but I literally started by shipping and developing infrastructure to do that, which is open source, by the way. So you guys get to reuse that, right? So, and this is a good example, right? So Secure Send, which is this, nice drag and drop ability to share a file, share a folder, share collaboration, all encrypted. I literally built it in a couple of weeks, right? But of course, this is a couple of weeks on top of 18 months of development, right? So let's be clear, right? So, and this idea that you can build enterprise products in a couple of weeks doesn't exist, right? You can do prototypes, right? It's a bit different, right? But here's the core primitives that I recommend. If you guys follow this path, I highly recommend these primitives. The first one is you open source everything, and I mean everything. Don't do the whole, it's open source as a drug gateway thing, right? Like, try this and then you have to buy the big subscription or the stuff. Like and again, I think that has worked in the past. I don't think that's a valid model in a way. You need to iterate, you need to ship it, low marginal costs, no databases, right? I put it there because it's quite critical. Because if the biggest reason you have a high cost is because of databases, and most time you don't, and lock in, and I basically show that everything I do doesn't have a database. I use the file system as a database, right? You run everywhere, you have agentic workflows, and you use LLMs to stop using LLMs, which I think is the key to make this work. So in old models, you have proprietary software, subscription login, customer data on your servers. You can see by the way, this was not created by Notebook LM. This was created by what I call Playbook LM, which you guys can use, right? Which is one of the products I shipped, right? So there's still a couple of little tweaks and nods, but it's actually pretty cool, right? Database dependencies, large teams, investors funded discovery, right? So the way I look at it is that the new model is that you have open source everything. You have a usage-based pricing, so you push the cost to customers, right? You have customer deploys in their environment. That's very important, right? You have no databases. MemoryFS is one of my open source projects. You guys can use if you want. Small teams, multiply with agents, and then investors amplify, which I cover in a second, right? So the economics is this, right? Like if you have low marginal costs, you can share your technology, right? It's okay, right? I can give you guys a token I'll share in a second where you guys can use my product, right? That's fine. I have very little costs for doing that. So that's important, right? And it's important that you guys can use something that I ship because that gives me feedback, right? And that's the flow. The flow is come up with something that you can ship, right? That's the key message here. Right? This just happens to be my architecture. I got MemoryFS, which abstracts the database system. I use client-side encryption, right, to encrypt all the data. I have multiple deployment targets. I build I call it safe, I call it sign Git, right? But it's actually, I literally develop a Git client. This is crazy, right? In a sprint I've done, I literally develop and publish what I call sgit. You can literally get it from PyPy. It's called sgit-ai, and it has all the primitives that Jim was talking about. You can push, you can clone, you can init, you can create vaults, right? But it's much lightweight, and it's literally like Git. It's freaking cool, right? And again, that's the foundation now for my stuff, right? And again, it's all zero knowledge, right? So again, start building. That's the key message, right? So here's my primitives. You open source everything, not because it's nice, but because it wins, right? Because it gives you a lot of interesting business models. But also the thing that is very powerful is removes from this conversation that technology is the moat, right? You have to be really brutal with your technology, right? You have to be, in fact, these days, the idea when you move from explorer to villager to town planner, there's even sometimes where you destroy everything that you created. You just build it from scratch, right? Because now you can. But you build it with, a lot of better engineering, a lot better understanding, because you now have a much better brief, right? On that evolution, right? This is the most important thing. Ship it. Don't worry about it. Don't think. Look, the bottom line is that, look, I shipped 4 companies. Probably very few of you guys even tried. You don't even know about it. It doesn't matter. If you ship something, if it doesn't work, guess what? People don't use it, right? So the blast radius of your mistakes are minimal, but you learn a lot. That's the thing. And there's so many little things that it's only when you ship it you actually will understand it. And by the way, if you do this, you start to understand much better how your business works. You start to have a lot more empathy for parts of your business that can ship, parts of the business that are always struggling, and all that jazz. So again, it's a really great learning curve. Even if you just do this so you can learn that, this is going to business school, right? Don't take an MBA, try to ship a product. I guarantee you're going to learn more, right? Trying to get something out there, right? And you're going to learn so much on technology and all that jazz, right? And then now you have these amazing models, right? To go through it. But this is also a very important thing, low marginal costs. And that's why when I arrive at no databases, whatever you do should cost very little, right? Because if it costs something, you're doing stuff they probably shouldn't do, right? Especially now that we have this massive elasticity of technology that we can use, which are the LLMs, right? So it's very important that you have very low marginal costs, i.e. the thing should not cost almost anything when it's not being used, and whatever costs you have, in this case, if you have them, you should pass them to your customer. Right, that's very important. I could not stress this enough. No databases, right? You basically build the file system as your database. I guarantee you that, in fact, challenge me, right? Bring your design, and I'll give you a design that does what you need to do, right? With no databases, right? There's very few cases, and I guarantee you're not going to be hitting them, in the first round, where you might actually need a database, right? I'm not saying that maybe in the future there is in some cases. Then you should have ephemeral databases. But in the beginning, it's about having low marginal costs, but also you need to run everywhere, from the laptop to Lambda functions to every cloud provider to offline, everything. And that's very important, right? And finally, you need to get into the agentic workflows. But the agentic workflows are not black magic. See, I don't like this idea that you have a box, you throw a bunch of agents on it, you close the lid, right? You keep shaking it, throw some money and some tokens inside of it, close the lid and go, hey, is it done yet? All right. Oh, cool, we got something, right? And then how was it built? Nobody knows, right? I don't buy that. To be honest, there's times for that. It does work in a way because of the way the LLMs work. That's not how I do agents. My agents are Git driven. I create all the briefs. Everything is fully mapped. Everything is use version control or Git issues, if you want to use that, right? It's very controlled. And yes, I have 21 agents in one of the team and 15 agents another one and 5 on the other, but they don't run all the time. It's like you create these mini squads that are focused on the task at hand. That's super powerful, right? So this is probably one of the most important concepts of the evening, right? I feel that there's a lot of projects that once they figure out how to do something with an LLM or vibe coding, they stop. And that's where you start. That's when you almost have, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do. But for me, the best model, in fact, if you look at this product I have where you can basically drop stuff, it does file transfers, there's no LLM in line at all. So a lot of the LLM security vulnerabilities, I just don't have it. I don't have it because what? Because I don't have an LLM in line, right? But I use the LLMs to build the stuff, to test the stuff, to give me the architecture, to map stuff across. It's kind of, in a weird way, Marvel got it right with Iron Man, right? It's kind of like that. I feel sometimes like that's my world. I have all these kind of visualizations tools. I create all those mini tools, etc. And then when I assemble it, it's kind of like, it's very, very sort of mechanical. And that's important because you have to remember that code is the most deterministic way to running stuff. So in fact, if I were you guys and you're working in organizations, I would go on to extremes, which is, hey, you need to make everybody to use LLMs, and you should be ban any projects that is actually puts LLM in line, right? Although don't worry, if they put in line, you're going to find out very soon because you're going to start to see the side effects. But I think putting LLMs in line is very dangerous. So here's the thing, right? And this is where the Wardley Maps come into play. You develop something, right? And then you figure it out, and then you start to run smaller and smaller models. You start to understand the problem, and you get smaller, until ideally in the end, you have no LLMs, right? And usually in the middle, I start to convert into semantic knowledge graphs, because that's also the other way to do it. So there's your primitives. Open source everything, iterate, ship it, low marginal costs, no databases, run everywhere, agentic workflows, and use LLMs to stop using LLMs. That's my recommendation, right? That's part. Right, now, ship it. I'm now going to fly to some of this. I cover this. Yeah, until you ship it, you're guessing. It's very important. You know, I've done this, right? And again, this is very brutal, right? You build something and you give it for free. People don't use it. Guess what? You don't have a product, right? You have a project, right? And that's cool. That's how you learn about it, right? You know, and a lot of people worry about, oh, I'm going to get abused. I'm going to do this stuff. I'm like, dude, get usage first, right? Then worry about it, right? It's a nice problem to have if your system is being abused, right? And this is the other thing, right? There's no idea that you guys are going to come up that is unique, right? Let's just be clear, right? And nobody here is going to invent the next Coca-Cola or that unique layer, that unique thing, right? What the key is execution, right? And I think Jim was saying, how many ideas you have every day? You got a ton. Well, this way is I create business. There's a site I have called docs.diniscruz.ai. You literally have business model after business model there. You have a lot of on AppSec too. If you want ideas, go there, right? But it's about execution. Right? That's the hard part, right? And that's what I want to talk about. You get this execution done, right? Because shipping is a discipline, right? That's the hard part, is to actually deliver something, right? From beginning to end, and you loop on that, right? And again, like everybody here has access to enough people, right? You don't need to make something that goes to millions of people, or thousands of people overnight. You just need to make sure that the next person that you can talk to gets to use it. And when they don't use it, it's brutal, but it's good because you learn where the attrition is, and then you keep doing it, right? So, you know, ship it, learn it, ship again. That's the flow, right? About it, right? And this is the thing, right? I actually view that the next generation of open source, you mass customize the deployments. You sell that, which is kind of what I'm doing now. Because the beauty of making sure that your stuff run everywhere is that you can now create a mini agent to support that, and that's very important. Yeah, and look, every SaaS, you know, if you think what's going to happen, like, you know, a lot of these companies got away with it for a long time, but it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And also for data governance, you don't want your data to be everywhere, right? So again, I think this is going to be problematic, right? Run everywhere, because the point is you can charge. Because when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to use your product, but I have all my privacy requirements and my compliance requirements, I go, great, run it in your environment. That's it, right? And then I just need to charge them less than it costs them to do it. Because again, open source, everything I do here is free, but it has a cost. You guys want to deploy it, hey, you need to get somebody on your end to pay for it, right? So I can provide that much cheaply, or the open source environment can provide that cheaply, right? So you want not that on the left, you want this. Deployment, that's where you charge all this stuff, right? Customization, and now we can scale this in ways that we couldn't before. So I actually think that open source is going to have a massive resurgence coming next, right? And here's my architecture, right? I have my front end, vanilla.js, web components. I have my skit behind it. I have a bunch of Lambda functions, and S3 maps everything. And my memory FS actually abstracts a whole lot, which is really cool, right? And then I encrypt everything underneath, right? That's the flow. And I strongly suggest don't go for subscriptions-based. That's lock-in based. That's very bad side effects. Go for usage-based, because again, it's brutal, but it's good because when you have it, it's real, right? And that's kind of the normal model, right? So where to start, right? So here's some ideas for you guys where to start on this stuff, right? So the first thing is, don't go out there and think about, oh, what should I solve? Don't, right? Pick a problem that drives you crazy. Pick a spreadsheet, right? Whatever spreadsheet you have, the spreadsheet is the worst from a technology point of view. It's not version controlled, it's not managed, it's ridiculously insecure. Just automate that. Build a tool on it, right? Figure it out, right? And then go from it, right? Find something that frustrates you or people you know. That's your first company, right? That's where you should start, right? So build on top of it, right? Don't invent the wheel, right? There's a lot of great technology out there already. Glue it together, right? Because you're still discovering how it works, right? So I'm providing a lot of primitives. There's a lot of people who've done it. And you kind of want this mode where you're leveraging a lot of the ideas that are already there, right? And they're very good, right? So again, don't go too wide. Focus, right? Focus on something and deliver one thing. So that's why I'm saying you shouldn't have one company. You should have 5, you should have 10, right? Because you should be focused on a very laser sharp sort of deliverable, right? That solves the problem. And this is the other thing that's very important, right? You want to build a technology stack that gets better as the LLMs improve. So again, on the Wardley Maps evolution scales, we know things are going to keep coming to the right. We know things are keep getting better. We know stuff is going to get more and more commoditized. You want to build a company that leverage that. You don't want to build a company that today happens to be on that little sort of like intersection or bit that the models are not good enough, right? And there's always going to be a place of value. You want to be driving that wave, right? Not to be crushed by the wave. And that's very important, right? And again, the primitives exist, right? So I build a bunch of them, and you can copy, you can talk to my team, and everything is open source, right? So again, pick a topic, do it a hackathon, do it one weekend, learn how to use it, learn how to use Claude. And I would say ChatGPT is good, but I think Claude right now seems to have a bit of an edge, right? On the common sense, how it's structured. And by the way, I run 0 models on my laptop. And from a security point of view, it's, I've hacked enough environments to kind of not trust the LLMs right now. So everything I do is on the web, which actually is quite a good constraint. So I run Claude on the web, I run Claude Code on the web. I actually have them communicating using my secure send technology, which is really cool, right? So that's how I operate, right? So again, all you do is start, and that's the flow. Now I want to talk a little bit about investors, right? Because I think this is important, right? On this flow. I think the mistake, and by the way, I want to say this publicly because hopefully I can check myself in a couple of years, right? My personal goal is to go on this sort of entrepreneur journey and still be smiling in 2 or 3 years from now, right? Because I've met too many friends that went on this journey, and the more successful they were, the more miserable they were as individuals, right? And because of all the stuff that happens when you start a company, right? So I'm trying to, in a way, hack my way into a much healthier environment, right? Which is kind of what I'm doing here. Right? So the way I look at this, investors are amplifiers, not spark plugs. And what I mean by this is that you should not raise money to try to find product market fit, right? I think that's very dangerous. I'm very glad I didn't have money for the Cyber Boardroom, because I wouldn't be where I am right now if I had found that. And I'll be doing something which probably, was not its own time, right? So the way I look at it is that the investors are the amplifier. They amplify what you have, right? And I think this is very important, right? And again, like now, the good news, you don't need millions now. You don't need to raise a crazy amount of money. What you need is to raise this amount of money to create an agentic team. And I don't buy this idea that you don't need people anymore. What you need is you need a lot more focused people. You can hire a lot more interesting roles, and even part-time roles that before we couldn't, right? So that for me is the flow. And the other thing that's interesting, and I love when you have a model that does this, is that most of the investors out there, they have a heart attack with just about everything I'm describing, right? Because if you look at it, I'm saying that everything is open source. There's no lock-in. There's no traditional moats. It's users-based pricing, and customers can fork our code base, right? Literally, most investors have a heart attack with every one of those sentences, right? My point is that that's great, because I don't want to talk to them, right? I want to talk to the ones who get excited by this. Right. And by the way, if you know any of those, I'm talking to a couple, but if you know some of them that want to invest, hey, send them my way, or talk to them and build your own companies, right? But this is really cool. It's a really nice self way to prune the people that you would not be interested in anyway. So, but it's very hard, right? Because it goes against most of the investment practice. That said, there's a crazy amount of companies that have been very successful doing that, right? So, because the point here is that it's not to eliminate humans, right? The point here is to scale, right, what you do this, right? And that's the flow. We talked about this, agent multipliers, right? And then the spark comes from what you do, right? So again, you need to find the product market fit. You need to create something that somebody else can use it, right? That they can get value from it, that you can charge, and you take it from there, right? And then you package it, right? And then you let agents scale it, because that's a very cool business model, right? Because that's the thing, right? If you take your business, what you do today, and there's an hourly rate, right? If you can deliver that in 3 or 4 hours with an agent and somebody pays for it, as long as it's more than the cost that you have or more of your hourly rate, you have a product, you have something, right? So use what you already know, use your expertise, right? On that, right? So you can productize that, and this is a good example. So I get asked quite a lot to review companies, right? And I have opinions. I have a very set of ways how I look at it. So, eventually what I've done was I created my own standard, right? I created a standard that said, here is how I review companies. And now all I do is I take the company website, I get Claude or ChatGPT to do a deep research on it, and then I review it, and then I deliver it. So I add a great amount of value, right, in a couple of hours. And that's super powerful, right? Again, all of you guys should be doing this. And just by trying that, you get a lot of value on it, right? So The other thing that's super valuable, right? And this is what I started doing with Cyber Boardroom, it was just too soon, is that when you deliver something, deliver it for 5, for 10 audiences. In fact, deliver it not for the person that you're delivering, but for their boss, for their peers, for their team. Because whenever you deliver something, the other person on the other side has to figure out what to do with it. Now you can customize it for them, right? That's a business. Everything I'm talking about here becomes a business if you can do it repeatable, right? And doesn't have cost, right? So again, start small, commoditize with agents, etc., right? And and that's the structure, right? So define the problem, structure the input, choose the right tools, validate, package delivery, make the customer happy. It's in a way, that's it, right? That's how you build a company on top of this, right? Here's stuff you can sell today: security assessments, threat model packages, vendor security reviews, compliant gap analysis, incident response playbooks. Jim talks about a lot of his prompts. He should sell these prompts. There's a lot of knowledge that he's done on those. But you have to remember that what Jim is selling is not prompts. Jim is selling Jim, right? Somebody will pay more for his prompts because he comes with his opinions. It's like, what will Jim say, right? I have my own opinions. Like, in a way, every one of you will have a sense of gravity. That's what people pay. They will pay for your knowledge, for your brand, for your experience, for your opinionated versions, right? That, in a way, Jim's prompt is just the way that Jim now can scale. So he now can service hundreds of customers or thousands of customers versus a couple at a time, right? But he should charge that because that's his intellectual property, right? Again, I'm all for open source, but I think there's areas where you should be valuing the creation, right? Or else it's a race to the bottom, right? And that's different. And also because what's now happened is that if you think about it, like that knowledge, it's only valuable when it's customized to the other side, right? It's no point of, that's what the problem in a way with some of our standards is like, hey, I got these 2,000 pages to freaking read, right? Good luck, right? What you want is the 3 pages, the 5 pages that are relevant for that particular theme, for that particular audience, etc. Right? So again, package it, price it, and sell it. That's the flow of this, right? And again, there's a token here. I'll share it. Maybe I send to you, send to the group, right? Is there's SGSN OWASP London? You can literally take that and drag and drop it, right? But I'll send to Sam, and Sam can share to you guys, right? And again, I'm saying what I'm basically doing what I've been talking about. I create a product. You guys can try it. You can do secure transfers. Try to hack it. Please do, right? It's pretty cool. It's client-side encryption. I basically see the beauty of being on the receiving end of a lot of incidents is that my whole security model for this entire product was I want my entire server to be completely compromised, and I don't want to have a security incident, right? And it's actually much harder than you think. But at the moment, there is no secrets on the server side, 0. There's no data, there's just encrypted data. And it's much harder to do when you would think, but I'm in a nice position where I go, hey, I can have a massive data breach on my server side, right? And there's at least no data that been compromised at that moment in time, right? Which I don't think a lot of people can say, right? And I'm also doing this thing where if you go and buy credits, which again, you can now buy stuff online. I have customers. I'll give you an open router key in exchange, and then you can play stuff because I already have a lot of stuff in there that you guys can use, right? Again, that's the business model. Like, I'm trying to jumpstart this. So I use the people that I can reach to become users of my platform, right? But remember that all my technology is for free, right? You can literally use all technology, right? You can clone it, you can deploy in your organization, you can implement it, right? The point is that I'm building a service, right, on top of it, right? Again, you can try it right now, right? And I want feedback. So everything, leads to here, right? So token is live, etc. There, right? And that, by the way, this is where I work. So you go pip install skit, you clone it, you get the vault, and you commit, right? In fact, this presentation was created like that, right? This whole presentation was done inside this Claude Code session here, right? When he wakes up, right? This entire Claude Code session, right? And actually, it's actually really cool. I actually did it on 2, right? So this is the Claude Code session that was doing the development, and so Claude Web, and then I had a Claude Code session that was actually implementing a lot of the code behind this, right? And I actually did a thing where I actually implemented a workflow where I basically had, I think it's this one here, right? Where I basically created, let's see, there you go, right? So here's a really cool thing where, look, I basically did this. If you guys see there, I said, hey, I took some photos, right? I built some stuff, and I said, hey, can you create some information about it? And this is an infographic that's just been created by actually instrumenting the workflow, right? So this is a good example of leveraging technology. So I can use my technology inside Claude Code to scale the whole thing. And in fact, this presentation was developed through it, right? Where I built a tool for it, right? Now, what I had here, which I'm kind of running out of time, right, is I then had a couple of examples of companies. I'll fly through this. So the first company, so these are just ideas of companies you could create. I call it method streams. Some of you, and Sam, always talks about the O2 platform. One of the craziest things I did on O2 platform was this thing called method streams, which basically was take one piece of the source code and create one file that has every code relevant to that. That I still yet to see others duplicate that, but this is taking that to a company level, right? Again, you can create an agentic team to map it out. The other one is you can have these ephemeral security testing environments, which still we don't have today. Like when it, and a lot of these things, like if you can go to a company and say, hey, I can create a testing environment that spins up, you can test stuff and I can destroy it. That's worth a lot of money, right? Because most companies don't have that, right? So again, if you map that stuff across, right? Then the other one is security intelligence and persona reporting. Again, this is crazy powerful. This is like saying, hey, I can go in there and I can deliver this for multiple audiences. And then the last one is two more, attack surface mapping. We still don't know this, right? And this is what I mean by you need lots of little companies, right? There's the idea that you're going to have this Uber company that's going to do this for everything. It doesn't work like that. You need the local companies, the local country, the local region, the local environment, the local industry, right? That's your opportunity. You're not going to provide services to the whole industry. You're going to provide services to your segment where you are an expert, where you know how things work, right? Again, map the surface, etc., right? And then the final one is develop a secure automation. There's a lot of tools on this, but to actually do this properly is still there. So there you go. So that's my kind of idea. Start companies, right? And all the pieces of the puzzle are there. And this is like the most exciting part in software development. And if you guys don't start the companies, somebody else will, and you're going to have to be protected against the thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of companies and agents that are coming your way, right? So it's a great way to scale. And thank you.